And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, who is Jeanette De La Rosa Ducat. She is the training director for UC Riverside and will be presenting training techniques virtually, how you can be unboring. She has a Doctor of Education degree and has spent the last 20 years managing regulatory-based education programs in higher education and nonprofit institutions. She specializes in online training, video production, and integrating active learning experiences. Without further ado, I will turn over the Zoom to Jeanette.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a good day. I realize I'm at the end of the symposium, so I'll try to make it, as my title suggests, unboring. And yeah, I actually work for the University of California Office of the President, and I develop trainings for all of the campuses and medical centers of the UC. So that's 500,000 plus faculty, staff, and students. And so you're in good hands. I'm going to be sharing with you some techniques we've done both in person during classroom trainings and then online, whether it's through e-learnings or videos or these days webinars. So let's get to it. So what I'd like to cover is just a kind of a comparison and contrast of different online training methods. Kind of wanted to go through what's called augmented reality with you, something similar to virtual reality. Maybe have us practice using one of the techniques you can use whether in person or online, something called polling, and then really talk about the role of training as part of a larger safety system. I know that often training is something that investigations say that people need more of because something went wrong, but really training is one pretty important piece in a larger system that involves these other things. And so during some of the slides, I will be kind of practicing some of the things that I'll be sharing, whether it's polling or augmented reality. So if you do have a moment, and if you are willing to participate, please have your phones ready or your mobile devices ready. It can be a phone or a tablet. We'll be going to some websites and see if you can participate with me. So first let's talk about some methods. I'm going to talk first about instructor training methods, instructor-led training methods in a classroom setting, because I think they really transfer well into a virtual or these online things we've been doing lately during COVID-19. So let's talk about those techniques. Active learning is something that I promote a lot. It's really the best way to conduct training because it focuses on skills. I know a lot of the way I grew up was listening to lectures and then just memorizing information, but that's not generally how people actually transfer their knowledge into behavior. So when we try to focus on skills, it's active learning techniques, things like questioning and comparisons and reflections and gamification. It's those techniques that tend to really change behavior. And so one very simple way you can do that, whether it's in person or online, is think about just asking these questions. I always say don't tell a learner what you can ask them. And one of the techniques is just to ask somebody a question that they can think through, and then if it's in person, maybe have them pair up, just say, here's the question, kind of think through it, what would be your answer? Now pair up with somebody and kind of share your answer, and in about 5 minutes after you've discussed it, let's go ahead and share your answers to this question. You can pick people in the audience. You can actually do that in webinar format too, but I'll discuss that in a little bit. So think, pair, share, a very common model of active learning by questions. Teaching back, I know a lot of us do this already, but it's just such a powerful way for people to show what they've learned, and maybe usually in small groups. So break up people into tables. First of all, set up your classroom in a table setting and then break them up, and then have them answer maybe one scenario or one question, and then have them kind of share back what they came up with as in terms of their answers to that question or scenario after the breakout period. And this is actually what we're going to talk about later when we transfer into what's called a webinar breakout room. So very useful, very important technique. Another active learning technique is just to use interactive things. So instead of just kind of standing up there and kind of talking to a PowerPoint slide, kind of build into your rotation some kind of tactile, motor skill. So for example, in the upper left-hand corner, it's an example where I've used Legos to demonstrate how important it is to use proper communication during an emergency. So we learned how to use radios, and we had somebody who was able to look at us at a completed, Lego block building, and then somebody else on the other line had to listen to how they built it and redo it. Bottom left-hand corner is when I was teaching hazardous waste, actually HazWOPER training, and we used Lego to demonstrate the efficacy of your gloves, and then how difficult it would be, how your senses are a little bit blurred when you're breathing through your respirator. On the upper right-hand corner, I've taught accident investigation using Jenga to supervisors. So each Jenga piece represented a different incident that, or a different root cause that that contributed to the incident. And so the more root causes people can come up with, the more effective the accident investigation is. And Jenga represents kind of what resulted when all of these things kind of combined on top of each other. Decontamination, so kind of just talking through, here are the steps that you do. You actually pull out a pool and kind of walk through people in an event. Here's an example in the bottom right where we actually had a mannequin which we had to rescue, and there's a competition. It was kind of fun. And of course you have these regular in the middle, these kind of games that you can talk through. Jeopardy is a really fun thing. If you have content, you can put it into the form of different questions, put it up on a board, and then just kind of have people go at it. It's very, very, very loud, but very engaging. So simulations. Simulations are also good in terms of just kind of having people focus on these motor skills that you want them to do in the workplace. So an example I always come up with is we talked about a hazardous chemical spill, and we gave people the actual incident on what they would see on an incident briefing form. They had to pull out all the PPE, personal protective equipment, from the warehouse and actually respond. But instead of using real chemicals, we just substituted it with things like soda or baking powder, or different things that made it safe, but also as still an effective way of practicing skills. So simulations are very important. And again, on this world of instructor-led training sort of techniques, if and when we ever come back to our universities, it's really important to have these simulations be as real as possible. So in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a lot of things we did in the laboratory are ranged from having nitrogen, sorts of little mini dewars up on the tabletop, and kind of dipping in just even a piece of cloth and seeing how it changes and freezes, and practicing putting on the PPE. Or what I really like is we usually find a laboratory and clean it up, but then we'll purposefully kind of mess it up or put things inappropriately throughout the lab, stage them, and then have people go through with their own inspection checklist, and then find as many things wrong with the lab as possible, and sort of put them into the position of becoming an EHS sort of staff member. And so we find this is really effective with labs, with trainings, with graduate students. It takes 10 minutes to set up a lab, and then 10 minutes to walk them through, and then 10-minute debrief. And so it's a very effective, comprehensive way of training. We've done hazardous waste training. We've actually separated, buckets, and had ping pong balls like pre-written with different chemicals in them, and people had to throw them in the right buckets and segregate them according to proper hazard classes. And that was a really fun way of teaching hazard segregation. Bottom left-hand corner, you'll see we use actually building a sandwich, or actually that was building a s'mores with marshmallows and graham crackers and chocolate, but they had to do it in the format of learning how to work in an emergency operations center. We've used glow germ and contaminated different writing utensils and paper, and then at the end kind of showed how germs pass. And then we actually brought out different equipment in industrial hygiene and showed people how they work and what they're for, and just a basic show and tell. But anything that you can do that simulates what the real world is like in a safer classroom environment is kind of what I'm speaking to. That really, really makes a big difference in the learning experience. So I talked about all those instructor-led classroom training examples because as we talk about online learning, it's definitely a different format, but the techniques that you use, the way that you actively engage with people, the simulations that you have should still kind of carry over. Just because things are online doesn't mean that it stops there with how people learn. And so we have to ask ourselves when we're doing things online, well, how are the different ways, what are the different ways that we can do to engage people. And so I'm going to talk about online training and engaging people through active learning, through different online training methods, through augmented reality, and through polling. And so I bring this up because our world is really enveloped in a lot of technology, and we really want to take advantage of that technology that's out there and use it to engage people multiple ways. So let's kind of look first at the different kinds of, I guess, online training products that are out there. All of these are things that the University of California produces, and I'm sure that you've done some of them here and there. And so I think by looking at these different formats, we can kind of see what are the best things we can get from each. So at the University of California, we primarily develop a lot of e-learning with, with a population of 500,000 people across multiple campuses and medical centers, and actually not even at a station, but throughout the world doing research. We really had to find a way to allow them to complete their training requirements, and that was engaging, but that was also very convenient to them. So e-learning, as in this example that I'm showing you, is one of the ways we did that. We created these trainings where the course was interactive and responsive. We have high quality visuals that we built in. They're animated, a lot like how PowerPoints are animated. There's narration added to all slides, and you can't hear it, but there's a script that people can read but also hear. And more importantly, because there's so many locations, we offer a way of choosing one campus that people might exist at and having specific information for them be available. People can skip back and forth at any time, and as you can see, we don't just talk through the training, but we actually have scenarios and, more importantly, a test at the end of each course. And people complete the test, they get feedback based on their answers. If they're incorrect, then we kind of review the stuff that they're missing, and then, until they learn it. So that's sort of the gist of an e-learning. I know it went really fast, and I can share this later, but it's basically a way of putting things online. And so if you have training staff, instructional designers, definitely kind of work through them to see how we can turn these trainings that we've been doing online into e-learnings. Classroom recordings are also useful. If you ever do have a situation where you need to record like somebody's demonstration and then put them up against their slides, classroom recordings are the way to go. You can do this with Zoom. In this example, somebody's sharing proper techniques for using a harness for fall protection, right? And so there's some things that you cannot just do online. You can't just speak to it. There are things that we actually have to show people. And so we've recorded a lot of these, actually some of that using Zoom, and then just put them online, and that's how people learn. So there's e-learnings, there's classroom recordings, but I think what we do a lot now lately is we use Zoom to host webinars, just like this one here, the CSHEMA Symposium. I'm going to talk a lot about how to make webinars interactive, but a lot of what we do lately, at least in the University of California, is we use breakout rooms. And so earlier when we were talking about, having people teach back, breaking them up into small tables and having them fill out a flip chart, well, this is kind of the same thing. It's just virtual. You break them up into rooms, and then you still have people teach back. So those same techniques of active learning should spill over into our virtual world. So I'm going to talk a lot about webinars and things you can do to make it more interesting, but I just kind of want to go over it as a concept. And of course, the University of California does invest in producing videos, and videos can range from demonstration videos, like in this example, how to wash your hands, where it's actually a technique we're teaching. But there are also animated videos. There's free tools like Vyond, V-Y-O-N-D, where you can actually, sort of like a PowerPoint, just kind of record a voice and then animate it using the different graphics that they have in their tool, which is as easy as kind of dropping in these different sort of GIFs into the screen. And so animated videos are really easy to do, easier than they seem, as long as you have the right tool. So again, Vyond is one of them. We used to use GoAnimate. I can name for you any of these different tools, but they're basically out there, and a lot of them have free trials, but they make your trainings much more interesting in a video format. So same thing, it's just a little bit more interesting to look at. So what we like to say is that if you make it available people will come and take your training. So we, in the last couple of years, I kind of calculated, we've had 100,000 training completions on our online trainings just simply because they're available. Making it available online, whether it's through a video or through an e-learning or even through a webinar, certainly gives you the capacity to reach more people more efficiently and quickly. So that being said, as we're talking about how to make your training unboring, let's talk a little bit about webinars. So as I know that we're all a little bit more, we're changed in the way that we do things remotely now because of COVID-19, but I think you all can imagine that we'll probably be doing this a lot even after the virus comes and goes. Things will change, our new normal is happening, and even if we all came back to our universities and campuses, webinars are still a way of outreaching to people that are just not in the same place. So since the future of training is virtual, a lot of things are going to be held online, and here are ways to make it unboring or engaging. I'm going to talk about all of these, but I just kind of want to put them out there for you to see in total. So talk about breakout rooms are one way to make things interesting, or just using photos where you kind of set something up that looks wrong is another way. Chat, so Zoom chat is a learning tool as well, and we can talk about how you can use it. Polling, using somebody's mobile device or even computers is another way to get people engaged, and we'll try to practice that. Reflection, and then games, even comparing and contrasting different documents, or even using existing videos or e-learning. So one of the first examples I talked about is just use templates. There are so many games out there that you can use to create basically learning assessments. And then you choose people in the group that you're teaching to in the webinar to respond. I typically use something like, here's an example of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, but I actually use Jeopardy a lot because it's easy and it's fun and people get competitive and they get really interested in the content. But before I even have a webinar, I usually ask for a roster or maybe even an organizational chart so I can see what people's positions are. And then if I have that list of names, then I can actually make sure I choose randomly people in the meeting so that I actively get participation rather than, asking a question and hoping somebody answers. Just sometimes people are real quiet. So create a game, create some kind of use a template that's out there. So many are out there, but really choose people actively using a participant list or roster that you got ahead of time. Another thing you can do is just create a scenario and then ask everyone to respond in the chat. And when you get a chance, read aloud some of those answers and then provide the correct answer. So on this example, we were looking at an incident investigation form, and we were talking about, what are the different root causes to this incident that had happened. It was a chemical injury. So in a lab. And so instead of me saying this is what the root cause was, I kind of asked, well, what do you guys all think is root cause? List as many as possible causes. And then people started using the chat. So they did that. They wrote in the chat, and I said, well, that's correct, Cassandra. It's inadequate instruction, as you can see, based on sort of the description of what happened. Or that's correct, Mylin. Lack of proper training is probably one of the things that contributed to it. Overall, the correct answer is, and then say what the answer is. But it's basically as simple as creating a scenario and then ask people to answer a question using the chat and then reading aloud some of those answers. One of my favorite and easiest things to do is actually just basically using pictures. So instead of saying that you must segregate your hazardous waste according to hazard classes and use secondary containment and then make sure you cover the caps, all this stuff that we usually tell people in the labs, environmental health and safety, show a picture of something that is wrong and then ask the question, well, what's wrong with this picture? Give me as many things wrong that you can find. And you'd be surprised just by throwing up a picture and asking a question, how many people will come up with different things. The left-hand side is a very stock image of a class I teach in food safety. And it's fun because people they start to talk about this guy with too much hair in his face or this this other person who likes to sneeze on his food, things that, you know, they can actually see and relate to and then talk about, rather than me telling them, don't do this and do that. People can see it and respond accordingly. So use a photo, very, very powerful way of learning. Another way, if you really have to do training that has to deal with paperwork, I think that's kind of what I got hazed with, just trying to train people on how to fill out paperwork. It can be fun, but the way you can do it that's not so just mechanical is come up with the same form, but fill it out differently. Fill it out incorrectly, and then fill it out correctly. And then give that to people at the same time. And with a goal of identifying as many problems that they could find between the two examples. So what I usually do is I say, here are two examples of the same form completed. Now go ahead and take 5 minutes and circle as many problems that you can find on the screen. And then after about 5 minutes, I ask them, well, what did you find? And they'll tell me maybe this or that. And at the end, I'll kind of do what I'm showing you now, which is, well, here are all the things wrong. And by looking at what's incorrect and comparing it to correct, that comparison and contrast, a lot of people learn that way. They don't just learn just by seeing the right answer. They learn not to do it the wrong way if you show them what a wrong example looks like. So good and bad example, and then have people just circle as many problems that they can find. Very simple. Polling is probably my favorite thing to do. One, because it's easy, and then two, people are on their phones anyway, and they can get immediate feedback. So I'm actually going to practice this in a little bit, but you basically can use cloud-based software to create quizzes and assessments, and then ask each person to use their phones to respond, or their computer browsers. So I'll go over the different kinds out there. This is an example of what's called Mentimeter, but there are others that I'm going to go over in a little bit. So polling. But at the end of the class, I can't underscore enough how important it is to just have people reflect on what they learned. So sometimes I'll just ask people at the end of class, you know, after the quiz is done, to just take a few minutes to examine how they will use this training to change their behavior. So a simple example is everybody kind of take a minute and identify what you learned. And so write that in the what column. Then answer or find out of what you learned. So what? Why is it so important? And kind of write that out in the so what column. And then, so after you find out kind of what you learned and why it's so important, now describe one thing you're going to do differently. Now what, right? What, so what, now what? Or it can be something as simple as take a minute and complete the start, stop, and continue set of questions, something you're going to start doing differently or stop doing or continue doing because of this class. And then we kind of talk about it afterwards. So reflection pieces are really important too, because it kind of solidifies what people learn. In a webinar setting, breakout rooms are really cool. I can talk a lot about how to do them. I have steps. If you want me to send you instructions how to do a breakout room using Zoom, you do have to be a host. But basically, it's simply just creating a scenario and then putting people in these different rooms that you can actually do automatically with a click of a button, giving them time to work on it, even if it's just 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then coming back and asking each group to report, even with a parameter of a 2-minute period. So I usually say at the end of it, okay, everybody's come back. Thank you for talking in your groups. Now we're going to ask each group to take only 2 minutes or maybe 5 minutes to report on what you guys discussed. And so putting that parameter of like, here's your time frame and that's all you got, but let's see what you came up with. And it's a really good way of having people teach back, but also for other people to learn about what they had learned as well. So breakout rooms are really, really useful in Zoom if you have that ability to do it. I bring a lot of this up because you know, a lot of what, again, I did when I was growing up learning was experiencing a lot of reading, a lot of people writing on boards and just, you know, talking at me, but never really was it this experience where I got to, you know, perform something or teach back until later years. But yet there's research out there that says, you know, after 2 weeks, you only remember 10% of what you read. So if we're only sharing like PowerPoint slides or documents, then people will really not retain as much than if we had them participate in a workshop or talk in a small group and teach back, or do active learning techniques like actually kind of redesign their own presentation or simulate something like I showed you earlier. So the more that you get people moving and actively engaged and not just listening, the more that you'll really be successful in transferring skills. And so, it's not just reading words, it's actually also just looking at graphics. I used to think, oh, I'll put this great graphic on my screen, on my slide, and everybody will love it. And no, they really don't. It's just a picture that they have to, remember. But it's not really as effective than if we had them draw their own picture or create their own presentation around these concepts. So the cone of learning is a really good way of ensuring that we transfer skills by using active learning. Now, that being said, I just kind of went through all these active learning techniques, both instructor-led and online, but I really want to talk about where kind of the future of learning is going to be going, or is actually already. And so if you haven't already heard about augmented reality, I'm going to share with you a little bit of what it looks like. You may or may not want to use your phones for now, but it's when people use their devices to uncover messages that are hidden in the world. And so usually these things are unhidden by using a tool like Zapper or HP Assist or something, where you can, find a code, kind of like a QR code, and then it'll open up basically an activity for you. So here's kind of what it looks like using an app. People see a layer of videos, pictures, or text through their phones, and objects are basically side by side in the real world. And it can be used for creating like scenarios in a laboratory or in a classroom environment without having people actually have to go there. And right now, as we are largely remote in our universities, augmented reality has been a big tool for me to show, well, here's a laboratory. Now, what would you do in this situation, and actually do it on your phone? So I'm going to show you how it works through this video. So let me just make sure I share my sound really quick. So give me just one more second to reshare my screen. So this is kind of what augmented reality looks like. So I know that was really quick, but basically I was trying to show that there's something here in the world that when people put their phones over it, a tool like Zapper, for example, can unlock that hidden layer, and people use their phones to engage with whatever's over that, what's in the real world. So kind of like virtual reality, but without the expense of heavy goggles and equipment, and it's really easy to create. So this is augmented reality using something called Zapper. And here's an example of what it looked like in a classroom environment. It could even be as simple as I have this graphic with this color, with just these words that had a hidden message in it, and people use their phones and aimed it at the screen, and they then saw a video, or sometimes they saw like an animated three-dimensional little person that they can like kick around, or maybe it's PPE that they can kind of segregate. So it's different things that they do based on whatever I set up. So, and it's not just a screen. So it's actually something you can do where you can print up images on paper, and people use their devices to scan that piece of paper, and then they kind of interact the same way as if they were scanning the screen. And so it's kind of easy, whether it's in, an in-person handout format or whether it's something you do on a screen. So I think we might actually have time to do this. So I'm going to give us just a second to try. If you are interested in participating the next 5 minutes in augmented reality, what I'm going to be doing is showing you a website to go to. It's actually web.zapper.com. So you essentially would take out your phone and then go to that website, web.zappar.com, ZAPPAR.com. And so if you have a phone, go ahead and try to open a browser and go there. And then I'm going to show you images to use. So this is what it's going to look like. So while you're bringing up your phones, you're going to open web.zappar.com, and then you're going to click on launch, because this is what it looks like when you go to that website, web.zappar.com, launch. And then I'm going to show you on the screen, or you can try it now, this image. And then when you put your phone, basically your camera, over this image through this website, it will start to do this little thing where it unlocks. And then once it unlocks, you'll then see some kind of an activity that I've set up for you, which is basically a video with questions. And so if you're interested in doing now, again, go to this website, web.zappar.com, and you can launch it and actually put your camera over this icon. But I'm gonna also put it on this next slide. So let's go ahead and take 2 minutes, to see if you're interested in doing it and capable of doing it. You do have to have a mobile device. I'm actually gonna test it myself to make sure it works. So if it doesn't work, that's okay, don't worry. I'll show you. It might just be because sometimes our phones are set up different. If we had like time in an actual webinar, I would one by one work with people or put them in rooms so that I can make sure that their equipment works. But basically, web.zappar.com, once you put your phone over this icon, this circular blue icon, or just my screen, hopefully it'll start to unlock. And if it doesn't, don't worry. Nothing's wrong with anything. It's just sometimes we're just like in different places. But if it does work for you, it doesn't work for me, but if it works for you, or if it doesn't work, click on rescan, try again. And if it does work for you, you should see some kind of an activity there. And you can answer it. You can kind of see what it's like. Right, that's about a minute. So if you were able to do it, then it should have worked. If you're not able to do it, that's okay. And I do think that the presentation will be shared later. So whenever you want to practice later, you can go to this website and look at another example, which is a laboratory safety example. And then, if you really have trouble, I can always do a Zoom with you and have you work through it. But basically, it's pretty cool. Now, this example, if you're able to do it either now or later, I encourage you, because this is an example that I'm showing you. If you go to web.zappar.com, click on launch and put the camera at this image, it's actually a 3-dimensional example. It's an example of finding hazards in basically a hotel. But it's the one example I like to share because if you have the ability to get certain kinds of cameras and set this up, this is where you can imagine most training will go in the future, which means you take your phone and then you look around your room with it. You actually can look behind you and then see different things. You can go forward and backward, up and down. And this is actually what it looks like. So if you have the chance to do that later and open your screen, this is more interactive than what I'm showing you. But this first slide shows you, or this first image shows you, here's a hotel room. You can actually move your phone up, you'll see the ceiling. If you move your phone down, you'll see more of the floor. If you move it to the right, you see, oh, there's a mirror here, and here's a hazard. And then if you press on this with your finger on your phone, this actual image of this ball actually moves. You actually interact with it. You can actually kick it to the other side of the room. And actually, when you select it, it'll go here on this little area where it says locate and select the 3 hazards. So one of the hazards is this ball in the middle of nowhere that people can trip on. If you move the phone to the right in this 3D example, you'll see some radioactive stuff, radioactive barrels, and that's another hazard. If you click on it, they'll go over here in this little collection area. And over here, if you go a little bit more to the left or right, then you'll see actual fire. It looks like fire. It is actually interacting. So if you ever get a chance to look at what augmented reality can do for you, this is a good example of testing it, and where if you can imagine doing it and where you set up a laboratory or you set up, I don't know, a facilities plant where they're a facilities room where they're sawing something, that you can actually bring people into the environment and interact with them in a way that's safe, where you don't have to actually bring them to a place. So augmented reality. Polling is another thing I do all the time. In fact, I'm going to do it with you guys right now. The 3 commonly used systems for polling are Mentimeter, which I like, Kahoot, which I've used, and then Poll Everywhere, which is what I've always done in the past. And so basically it's setting up questions on a screen and asking people to use their phones to interact with them. They can use your phone or tablets. They can even use your computer browser. So I'm going to actually have us practice what it looks like, but let me show you kind of why I use Mentimeter. Mentimeter allows you to ask different questions. It can be an open-ended question like in the upper left-hand corner where it comes up in little tiles. It can be a multiple choice question that people answer. They can get feedback on. It can be like, what's wrong with this picture? And people can vote whether they think it's a good or bad example. But more importantly, it does what competition and leaderboards, which is what I like. So this is what it looks like when people are engaged in using polling. This is what Kahoot, but it's the same thing. It's very engaging because people aren't just listening like you guys are listening to me right now. So I'm actually going to ask you to participate with me. I'm going to ask you to go to this website, menti.com, www.menti.com. You can use your phone or you can use a web browser. I highly suggest use your phone. www.menti.com. So go ahead and try that out right now and then enter the code that it asks you. The code is 551643 and 2. So 5516432, and you can see how people are already getting in. It'll ask you a question. The question is, what's your name? So we have Heather and Fabiola and Lisa. We have Megan, Jesse and Erica and John and Christy, a whole bunch of people joining. And what they did was, if you would, go to menti.com, menti.com, and enter the code 5516432. It's on this very top, 5516432. So I'm actually going to practice it and give you guys a minute to do it. Once you enter the code, enter your name so we know that you're there. So I'm going to give people just 1 second, and I'm actually going to join with you just so that I can test what it's like on your end. And if you are able to get in, you can actually use emojis if you're used to texting a lot, like I am, to put your name in it. Okay, there I am. See, this is Jeanette. Okay. All right, I think we got a good amount of people. Yeah, a very good amount of people. If you join late, if you want to join later, that's okay. This will always be on top, and you can just go to the screen and go to this, enter this code. All right, so we're going to go to the next slide, and it's going to ask you for your name again. And the reason why it's just kind of a leaderboard. So go ahead and enter your name again. If you don't enter your name, that's okay. You just have to remember what your little avatar looks like. So enter your name and click Join Quiz. And then when you're ready, I'm going to ask you a question that you're going to use your phone to answer. So hopefully you see your little avatar. Now here's the first question. You're going to answer the question as quickly as possible to get the number 1 place. So after 2 weeks, people will remember blank of what they read. So will they remember 10%, 20%, 50%, or 90%? So choose an answer on your phone or computer. After 2 weeks, people will remember blank of what they read. Cool. And the answer is 10%. People will only remember 10% if what you give them is just something to read. So after about 2 weeks. So cool. So the 19 people who answered that correctly, you're on your way to winning. All right, here's one other question. And the question is the same thing. So get your devices ready. Training is part of a larger system that includes policies, inspections, hazard assessments, equipment, and what? Now, I didn't go over this answer, but do your best. Training is part of a larger system that includes what's important, what? So is it free giveaways? Is it lack of feedback? Is it management or no feedback? So the answer is management. So correct. So training is a large part of a larger system that includes everything. More importantly, includes management, which is, positive, negative feedback, reinforcement, discipline, policies and procedures, and all that stuff. And although I used to give free giveaways as part of a training, that's probably not as effective as a way of having a culture of safety in training than it would be to get some management involved. Okay, all right. So thank you for participating in that one. I have 2 more. But before I go over there, I wanted to show you the results. So the person who answered it correctly the fastest possible was Heather. So congratulations, Heather, for being quick on your phone and having the correct answer. So good job. You figured out those answers. And anyway, it's really fun to see that you were able to do this quickly. So that's how you use polling. I do have 2 more questions. I kind of went over a lot of different things. So if you're willing to answer, the top 3 activities you're more likely to incorporate, kind of use your phone to answer that question. Is it breakout rooms? Are you more likely to incorporate chat? Maybe a photo that people, good bad example that people can compare and contrast? Are you more likely to use e-learning or games? Or maybe polling like what we're doing now, or maybe reflection pieces. So what are the top 3 activities that you're most likely to incorporate that we just talked about? So go ahead, let me give you a couple seconds to answer using your phone. Wow, a couple of ties. So the top 3 activities most people participating are likely to incorporate are compare and contrast using maybe photos, games, such as Jeopardy, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Jenga, and then polling, because I hope you had fun, but it seems fun. I'm also going to do this because I think it's really useful as a way of showing an example of how to use polling to manage questions. So if you can, go ahead and go to this slide. I've left a box where you can ask a question. And so I know that there's some questions in the chat. So if somebody can maybe type in a question that they put in chat or ask any question, so just so we can look at what it looks like, please do so using your phone. Good, we have one, cool. Okay, so ask as many questions as you want. And then, I'm gonna actually model how I use this in a webinar and in a classroom to answer questions so that people know where we are. And so here's one question. How difficult is setting up polling as in this matter? So it's really easy. So if you go to Mentimeter, mentimeter.com, it basically is it's a template where like a PowerPoint slide where you ask the question, put the correct answers, and then basically in your class just run it. It's like building a slide. It took me 5 minutes. If you really want to know, it took me 5 minutes before this symposium to set it up because I was last minute. Okay. This was amazing. Can I have your contact information? Absolutely. I have actually on the beginning and last slides of my presentation, I have my email. I'm always happy to talk to you because this is kind of get really nerdy about stuff like this. It's really fun to talk about. So do I set the time for each question in Menti? Actually, no, you can, but Menti usually gives people 20 seconds. That usually is the time people need, but you can extend it. You can extend it to a minute. You can drop it down to 5 seconds. And then, let's see, do you have websites to use for games? So I do have a web page that I'm going to put in the chat later where I've collected all the different tools that I use, like whether it's, game-based sorts of, templates or Mentimeter or Kahoot or augmented reality. I've kind of put that all on one kind of landing page. So if you're interested in these tools, you can check them out and click on their links and learn more about them. Okay, and budget friendly. Yeah, Mentimeter is actually free. It's free for the first couple of questions. If you want to do like 100 questions, you do have to start paying a price. It's about I don't know, we do something where we pay $100 a year for the whole year with unlimited questions and unlimited people. But there is a free version. It just kind of limits the amount of questions you can ask. So, all right, so I shared that because it's fun to answer your questions. But I also shared that as a way of modeling that when people see the questions on the board and you're talking through it, they kind of know, oh, okay, we're on this question. So that I know where I'm at. I'm not lost. But it's a very good, useful way of moderating live. So let's get back to my presentation. So Thank you for participating. And even if you didn't, hopefully that was useful for you to see how Mentimeter works. People use their phones to interact with the screen, and it's real time, all this feedback and the results. So that was really cool. And also congratulations, Heather. Okay, so I just wanted to end with talking about training is really kind of an important component. I think the most important component, but still just one component of a larger system. And that larger system really should include, things like policies and inspections and hazard assessments, equipment, giving people PPE, management, including restricting control to laboratories or workspaces until people complete training. And then when they do complete training and they still don't do the right thing, give them feedback and, negative and positive if they do the right thing. I think that sometimes in the world of training, we're sort of given this burden of trying to tell everybody everything and educate people, but yet we can't stand alone in what we're doing in a safety system. We have to really be reinforced with a policy or people that spirit or that champion kind of what we say in our classes, or maybe an assessment of hazards, because sometimes they can, training happens, but then there are other things that are happening in a workspace that we don't know about, and those are the things that need to be addressed outside of a training course. So Bob Emery, if you're familiar with Robert Emery from University of Texas Health Sciences Center, he always says, I like to quote him, he said once, a true culture of safety requires a commitment across the organization. So a true culture of safety isn't just about making the training people do all the work, right? So I think in my examples of the different systems, training is one piece, but you need to have a policy. In this example, the University of California has a policy requiring training for everybody in the lab, for example. You need to have a culture of safety where maybe you do marketing pieces, accessible marketing pieces, right? Marketing pieces, encouraging people to think safely. Maybe you have some kind of a IT system where you do hazard assessments online. Maybe you inventory all your chemicals using barcodes. Whatever it is, it's training is an important piece of this larger system of safety. So that being said, I'm slightly early, but I did want to kind of talk about, summarize what I talked about. We compared and contrasted different online training methods. So I showed you e-learning and videos, both animated and demonstration. We talked about webinars. We went into webinars and fun things you can do. Not just fun, but actually effective things you can do to ensure learning takes place, whether it's compare and contrast with photos or even polling. We practiced using polling. For those of you who were able to do augmented reality, similar to virtual reality, you practiced today. And even if you didn't practice today, I would bet my kids that augmented reality is where it's going to be. Give it about 5 or 10 years. I mean, the technology is already out there. It's, just people aren't as familiar with it, or they have to learn it. It's a very short learning curve, but it's going to be, how we learn in the future. And then more importantly, really identify that the role of training is important, but it's part of a larger system. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. And so I know we have questions. I haven't been paying attention, so maybe, I don't know, we can moderate them. But if you do have questions outside of this webinar, I love talking about this stuff. I really do. So go ahead and email me, jeanette.duca@ucr.edu.